Sure will.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nextv Plus panel, From the Streaming Wars to the Era of OTT Consolidation. We're kicking off today's OTT streaming block of panels with a look at the subscription streaming landscape and how it's continuing to transform amid a challenging market and intense competition. My name is Tyler Aquilina. I'm a media analyst for the Variety Intelligence platform. I'll be moderating the panel today. Joining me are panelists Stephanie Myers, who's Senior Vice President of Distribution at Starz, Evan Shapiro, Professor of Media Studies at Fordham and NYU, and Igor Oreper, the Chief Architect at Bitmovin. Thank you all for joining us today. So before we dig into things, why don't we just go around real quick and have everybody introduce themselves. Stephanie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Starz?
Sure. Yeah, I run Starz's OTT business in the US, essentially managing all of our distribution across aggregators like Amazon Prime and Hulu, as well as the direct-to-consumer Starz app on platforms like Apple devices, Roku devices, Fire devices.
Great. Evan, in addition to your teaching positions, you are known as the unofficial cartographer of the media universe. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been making these maps of the media universe, charting the evolution of the ecosystem across audio, video, social, and gaming for a couple of years. And I write about those evolution twists and turns on a regular basis, usually on LinkedIn, but also on a newsletter called Media War and Peace. And then I consult with companies around the media ecosystem on their evolutions. Notably, we worked recently with Warner Music Group to help them launch 3 FAST channels, which was just announced this week.
Yeah, great. And then Igor, tell us a little bit about Bitmovin and what you do there.
Sure. So I work for Bitmovin. Bitmovin is a small tech startup. We make really great video streaming tools for developers who build these video streaming services. And my job is to be chief architect and really just technical advisor to our customers and our prospects.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot to dig into here, so let's get started. The crowded streaming market and Wall Street's new skepticism of the SVOD business model are forcing companies to rethink their strategies of late. Many expect there to be a contraction in the number of streaming services on the market in the years to come, but no one is dropping out of the race just yet. But who knows, that may change in the coming weeks or months or years. It's a fast changing marketplace. We just saw HBO Max return to Prime Video channels just this morning. But to sort of kick things off, we're talking about the streaming landscape, maybe future consolidation. Are there too many streaming video apps on the market right now? I think we're starting to sense some consumer frustration with just how crowded the marketplace is. Are there too many players out there? What do you think, Stephanie? Maybe you want to start things off.
Sure. Yeah, I think ultimately there are. I think we've, in a funny way, recreated the circumstance, sort of the height of cable, where we have this incredible volume of content, so many options for the customers. And yet at the end of the day, there's a lot of frustration from the customer and a lot of sense of not understanding the value of what they're paying for. And I think, at the end of the day, some of that is just, people paying for 15 different apps. I mean, that's an extreme case, but even at 4, you're only watching one show on each app. You're constantly managing in and out, probably a set of up to 15. I think that's a pretty bad dynamic from a customer experience. And at the end of the day, there's going to have to be a fair amount of consolidation, at the very least aggregation, to make it easier for the customer to understand the value of what they're paying for.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, you have to realize that there's the one bundle that's kind of falling apart, which is the cable bundle, but then the underpinning of that, which is the triple play. The MVPDs, the cable systems have been selling this other package around in which video sits. That's unbundling as well. And what is that being replaced with? To Stephanie's point, the customer does want some sort of convenience and aggregation. But what is that aggregation? Is it necessarily only across video, or does it then veer into other verticals? When you look at Apple and Amazon, they are also curating music and gaming and other needs in the hierarchy of a consumer's life. And so I think it's not only going to be video. I think you're going to see a deeper integration with music services and gaming services, especially in the next couple of years, as those platforms become the chief competitors in the space.
Yeah, I would add, so totally agree, Stephanie, on consolidation and kind of what's old is new again, right? With cable bundles, it did sort of come apart, and now it's come back together in a different form. I think at the end of the day, it's people sign on to watch content. How they get that content, through which services, and what is their experience is starting to matter a lot more. And being a technologist at heart and someone who loves the entertainment media space, I'm actually really excited about it. So I think the consolidation is happening, right? We see that every week. There's a new announcement. Something is acquired, something is merged and aggregated. But now, given the ability for consumers to watch on different devices through different apps and experiences, gives them a lot of options. But also with a lot of options is the challenge that it's hard to find things. It's hard to find things and see them in the same quality of experience that you're sort of used to, or that consumers were used to some years ago with a cable and MVPD offering. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for consumers to find the content, but it's really hard because there are so many services.
Well, I think the subscription fatigue is why you're looking at so much experimentation in free as well right now. So, I think the ultimate thing, the reason why HBO is going back to Amazon channels is because that aggregator model lowers churn. The consumer has one bill to pay with regards to those services, like a cable bundle. So, that convenience does matter. It helps everybody who's in it. I don't think, though, to Stephanie's point from earlier, I don't think you're going to see the number of publishers reduce. I think it's the number of access points. That's where I do think you're going to see a slimming down, both on the front end and on the back end, from the consumer standpoint, but then also, there's a tremendous number of competitors in the back end of all of these services as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're already talking about, things like content discovery, how difficult it is for consumers to find what they're looking for now. And, as consolidation, moves forward, I think that will become an even bigger concern. Speaking of HBO Max, they're going to offer this combined HBO Max Discovery Plus product next year. Some observers have raised concerns over how difficult it might be for consumers to navigate such a vast library of content in one place. How can streamers help consumers find what they're looking for, and how might the process of content discovery shift?
Well, I think this goes to, a little bit of what Evan was talking about with the Prime Video channels re-entry for HBO. I mean, this is the big challenge, right? Is conveying the value of your content to your customers, not just for the marquee titles. I mean, the crazy thing is these customers have been conditioned to expect so much for so little in the streaming space, from billion-dollar budgets to Marvel movies hitting 2 weeks after they're in theaters. It's fantastic for a consumer, but at the same time, we've kind of, we've created this dynamic where it's an insatiable problem, and you have to be able to dive deeper in your library. You have to be able to explain the value of the breadth of your content. I think live also plays into that, to your point, 100%. Evan, in terms of, right? Like, okay, lean back. It's coming to you. You don't have to go you don't have to do the search yourself. And I think, you've got 2 points of access that are really in a great position to make the most of this moment, and that's the aggregators and the device owners, right? So the device owners, between universal search and hosting all of the apps, they have the chance to streamline the content, discovery experience. And sometimes it's the same company, often can be the same company, and the aggregators are in the same position, right? So that's, why you're seeing HBO going back on Amazon.
Which includes Roku and Samsung.
Yeah.
And so there's a reason why Samsung is the #1 maker of television sets, but Roku is the #1 video platform on the face of the earth. And that's because they make some TVs, but they also are on the device that streams on a lot of Samsungs. Because the interface is frankly easier, I think, to use than Samsung's, to be blunt. And so that is going to matter, and that discoverability is going to matter. Amazon is rushing to be the biggest competitor for Roku. And I think you're going to see Google not making their own televisions necessarily, but supplying the operating system, and then again, the gateway. And I think, if you look at Amazon, Roku, and Google as kind of the next version of discoverability for the ecosystem, I think that's actually not a bad, as much as it pains me to say this, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Their searches are good. The problem is when there's this myriad search and everybody has to change the metadata, and then you have to also hop between apps and then linear services. Mm-hmm. It gets very difficult to navigate all of that, which is why an Android-like product and a Fire-like product, and if Roku can develop a plan for the rest of the world, a Roku product could be very helpful.
And this also goes to, the evolution of a lot of streamers, a lot of big companies just entered the streaming space and quickly built walled gardens and refused to kind of participate with the broader marketplace. And I think what we're going to see is that's not viable. I mean, if Disney is getting criticized for their growth and their profitability, I mean, at the end of the day, making it difficult for the customer to find your content is just not a viable solution. We've got to be able to make it really simple, whether it's through universal search on a platform or through different aggregation partners. You have to make it easy for your customers to find your content.
Yeah, I would just add from a technology perspective, right? It's a difficult problem. Everyone builds their algorithms differently, right? Their discovery and recommendations algorithms differently. I think it would be great if some of the ones that we know work quite well are open source and available to other providers. Certainly, aggregated search on devices like Roku, but also now Fire TV and other connected devices. The content providers have to be open to take those walls down so that their content is discoverable. And I am seeing that trend happening. I do see it's easier to find content, but then you still have the problem of the volume of content. And so, I think at the end of the day, you have consumers become pretty committed to a certain experience, right? And they'll stick to that experience because it's one that they like for whatever those reasons are. It's hard to get them out of it into a different experience. And so I think from the perspective of a content provider, and I'm not in the distribution business, of course, but from the perspective of content providers, I think it would be really helpful if the guards are sort of taken down and they take a more consumer-focused approach because there's enough consumption for everyone. And then the other point I would make is, there's a lot of content. And I think one of the benefits of the streaming, how video streaming has developed over the years is, there are providers who are able to develop a sort of niche following, right? Like Crunchyroll, for example, for anime content, right? Before that, it was quite difficult to find anime content for those fans. And there may not be, millions or billions of those fans, but that's okay as long as they can find their content across the myriad of services that works. And so, I think surfacing the niche content to the hundreds of thousands of consumers or even tens of thousands of consumers is really important.
I think not only that. So he's Igor is it Igor or Igor? Sorry.
Igor, yeah.
Igor. So the point there is you're hyper serving a niche, right? That is absolutely key and core to, you know, I think if you're not going to be Google, what else are you going to be? And you have to hyper serve whatever niche you're, even if it's a Game of Thrones size thing, it's still a niche relative to the entire whole. The other thing is to go to fully monetize, to use the hide and all, as I like to say. You know, Crunchyroll, I think, demonstrates not only hyper serving a niche, but then also mining that niche for every single monetizable element that it has. So there's AVOD and there's SVOD, and there's kind of everything in between. They do merchandise. They kind of really truly own that space in North America, and it's a really nice profitable business. Is it going to be $1 trillion business? No, but you know, for Sony, it's inarguably probably one of the stickiest subscription products that they have.
I agree with the comment on, you know, the niche services really leaning into serving their customer base and who they are. But I think a challenge that we're seeing, and this is, I think, going to shake out as, again, customers demand a better user experience across platforms and devices, is that, you know, the niche services cannot spend enough to get the kind of placements and the kind of surfacing and you know, get in front of customers in the same way that you know, a Disney or an HBO or others can. So it sounds great. It is the right strategy, but I think the challenge is, not only is there this huge mountain of content everywhere, but then, you know, the value of the marketing dollars is just shrinking as people are entering the space with huge marketing budgets for just like a single show. You know, Crunchyroll probably, like, for their entire year, their budget's very it's very different than just one show at like Disney.
Well, and I think you're going to see those dollars shift too. I think the days of endless spending on customer acquisition is going to change to more what is the lifetime value of each customer you're acquiring, not necessarily can I get customers to the top of the funnel. That's going to be a dramatic shift in 2023. And what's fascinating to kind of triple click on that point, the highest month of churn in Netflix's history was the same month they dropped the latest installment of Stranger Things. So, you know, when you look at kind of what the rules we thought were, we drove all of these customers to and then the highest month of churn. So, you know, it really, and then the lowest churning product in video, we don't really know Amazon's churn, but it's probably Amazon because it's connected to all these other things. The lowest churning video product we know as far as premium streaming is the Disney bundle, which comes loaded with ads, you know, and all these different products. So it kind of speaks to where I think, to Stephanie's problem, to the issue that she pointed out there for a second, but where we're headed kind of is into these mega bundles that are going to help all the players who are in them and hurt those that aren't.
Well, to that point, you know, we were talking about niche content a moment ago. You know, data has shown that these niche SVOD services are growing faster than many of the major services. But, you know, as things start to consolidate, are these niche services going to be able to continue existing as separate entities, or are they bound to become tiles on these major services to help, you know, with the proposition of a great bundle of content?
I mean, I think if they're going to survive, they're going to do both, right? I mean, the point is the niche services need to be, and frankly, it's not just the niche services. You're looking at Disney doing it now. Everyone needs to have a realistic perspective on their total addressable market and actually drive profitability rather than just follow the Netflix model from 10 years ago when there was nobody else in the streaming space. That's not going to work anymore. I think the niche services, you know, everything that I understand about them is that they actually, you know, they make a lot of money per subscriber. They have relatively low churn. They don't have to invest as much in marketing, which is amazing. So that should be success to them. And I think being a tile in an aggregator's platform as well as having a standalone app can both work in that because they're serving their customers wherever they are.
Yeah, look at Hallmark Channel, I think personifies this. I don't think they're going anywhere. Like, they survive in either world. They just have to perfect the transition that they're going through. And I think that they have the leadership there to do that. Masterclass is another one that I think is doing incredibly well. Then you look at, I mean, Spotify is not a video product. They have the lowest churn actually probably in all of mass entertainment, but they're also not profitable. So you can lower churn and keep customers, but at some point is the content too expensive? So you have to, not only do they have to Stephanie's point, be honest with themselves about their total addressable market. And I think Crunchyroll is another good example of that. They know exactly what their market is, and they have a very low churn as a result of that. But you have to understand what the business model is. Can you actually make money serving this market? And even on a mass size, you have to ask yourself that. And that's the thing that, as everybody chased Netflix into the rabbit hole, no one stopped to say, but is this a good business model? And then we found out in first quarter, oh no, it's not. So maybe don't. And I don't know that just adding ads is the answer to that. If it were, I don't think Bob Chapek would have lost his job.
I think there's still a lot of experimentation going on in the market. So I also agree with Stephanie. You have to, as a niche service, you have to be in both places, and time will tell, right? Either you're successful in one, you're successful in both, or maybe in some cases, maybe not in either. But I think a lot of times, the sort of consolidation will take care of that in the long term. And many of these services will survive because, to your point, Evan, they have a very, very loyal following and very low churn.
Mm-hmm. Well, to that point, churn is obviously a very big topic right now. The priority is really shifting from chasing that Netflix model of acquiring customers at any cost to really acquiring customers that you can then retain as much as possible. You really want to build a loyal customer base. I'm curious, what are some strategies, Stephanie, this is you in particular, you are in the distribution business. What are some of the strategies that you found effective for holding on to subscribers in this market?
Yeah, having a really a clear value proposition for your customers, and serving the customer. So I think when a lot of streamers entered the streaming space, they focused on shows, right? The sort of tentpole moments. But the reality is you need to have things behind that to back it up. So that you're not just living show to show and hoping that the next one is going to be equally as fantastic. And even Netflix is experiencing that. So, some of the things that we do is we acquire and we program around our marquee shows. We may have marquee moments, and then we're going to make sure that strategically we're serving that customer base with like content, whether it's content we've made ourselves or we've acquired. Additionally, especially for the Stars app specifically, making sure that we have a best-in-class user interface that makes it very easy to find that content, makes the customer on their journey understand the value of what we have that also speaks to whatever they came in for. So I think those kind of things, at the end of the day, if you're trying to explain to the customer outside of your environment, if you're trying to explain to the customer the value of your service, then you're spending a lot of money. And so we're trying to, while the customer's in the experience, make sure that they understand what they're getting and get that value out of it.
Yeah. I'm also curious, there's a lot of experimentation going on in content right now. We're starting to see even Netflix is stepping into live content, potentially for bigger expansion in that space. Evan, I know this is a topic you've written about in the past. Talk about how streamers can expand their content offerings, particularly with live content, to make their services more attractive to consumers.
I mean, I think to Stephanie's point, you want to create some level of utility. If they're only going to your service once a month, they're going to churn. And what we've seen, at least in the subscription premium video world, even with ads, is that the channel changer has turned into the serial churner. I come, I binge, I cancel, I move on to the next service, repeat. And so you have to give something to the consumer that keeps them coming back. Live sports, so 17 weeks of the NFL on Amazon certainly helps that. Stephanie's point, a healthy dose of movies and series that all fill the same need of that consumer. HGTV doesn't have any sports, but boy, oh boy, that's the only channel that seems to defy the audience trajectory of the rest of cable, because it just is always on in someone's home, right? So you have to have some sort of utility. You have to have quality. That's table stakes. You have to have certain elements that are table stakes of television, right? But the utility, the reason to check it out once a week, multiple times a week. Sports is definitely one of those things. That's why every single big tech streamer, except Netflix has a sports strategy. On the other hand, local, live, news. This is going to be something that people care about. The biggest turnout midterms in our lifetimes, right? An interest in civics on the local level, at the city council level, which is where a lot of money in advertising from a political standpoint is going. So local live coverage, I think, is a really good addition to Element. But utility, back in the old days of cable, when Viacom and Dish would get into a war and they would go dark, people would call about The Daily Show because it was on, get this, every day. And so having something that those consumers will miss on a daily basis, to the point where the gospel channel will always have a place to go, because every Sunday there's going to be an audience, and a very, very intense audience looking to watch that content.
Mm-hmm. I would also add that, utility it's important, but part of how do you get utility? Part of that is the quality of experience, right? And that's the quality experience of the application. So you need to be able to log in simply. You have to be able to find the content you want simply. The content that you're interested should be right there on the first screen. You shouldn't have to look for anything. And then once you start watching that content, it has to work really well. No errors, no rebuffering, right? All of those things that we sort of assume happens. And, we have a lot of data from our customers that does show the rate of poor experience are actually quite low, but it matters a lot, because it doesn't take a lot for a consumer to have a bad experience and say, you know what, I'm not going to come back for a week, right? Maybe it was just a flaky, I'm going to go watch something else for now. So I think in order to get that utility, quality of experience is a really important part.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Every moment of friction for the customer is money you're spending to get them back or retain them. And I'm, Stars, when we launched our app about 7 years ago, we didn't even do the authenticated like TVE, OTT split. We just started with one app for everybody. And really we're kind of at the forefront of that strategy. And ever since then, I've really prioritized that customer experience within our app, as well as working with our partners to make it, as beneficial as possible for the customer. But you'd be surprised at some of the basic things that even the largest streamers or platforms don't prioritize for different reasons. And I think at the end of the day, that's where, push is going to come to shove, and customers are going to make their decisions with their wallet in terms of where they're going to spend their money, where they're going to spend their time.
Well, what are some examples of that? What are some things that these bigger streamers should be prioritizing, do you think?
I mean, I'm not gonna be specific, but there are platforms that surprisingly, for example, don't do autoplay for their series. Some very large platforms don't do that, and as a customer myself, I'm shocked that I have to go find the next episode of something. That's a very simple way to keep a customer engaged. And then even at the end of a series, what is the next piece of content like that? That should be auto-playing as well. It's more common for the aggregators because they're used to serving across multiple sets of content, but some of the direct-to-consumer apps kind of have these little like wonky experiences.
Well, and it's kind of like honestly table stakes again, kind of stuff. Like I was just watching a series. Why is that not the first thing that pops up when I come up? And these are big services, but that just isn't happening. Just the basics of skipping back and forward in a show, like it should be really relatively easy and uniform. It's hard to ask people to have a uniform experience, but remember what we're replacing is every channel on my television set used to behave the same exact way. Now they all behave differently, and
Right.
I need different logons, and it has to pings my phone, and yada yada. And then now travel with that and try to recreate that experience, you know, in an Airbnb somewhere. And that whole thing should just be so much simpler than it is.
I'll give a couple examples. Login. I mean, that's kind of a solved problem. Why is it so difficult for me to log into my favorite streaming service? Or maybe I want to try a new streaming service and I have to sit there and type my username and password with a remote. I mean, come on. It's, so that's kind of a simple one, right? And I don't know, half the time I give up. I just don't have the patience for it. Another one is in the aggregated experience. You know, why is it sometimes that I go back to a show I was watching through, you know, my Xfinity Flex box or through my Roku box, but I start from the beginning. I don't want to watch the first episode again. I've already watched it, so now I have to exit and go back. So those are kind of the simple things that they've been solved, right? These are not complicated problems. They just, you know, someone has to put attention and care into them. But then there's still the complicated problems, which is, you know, rebuffering. Rebuffering is a big one. So, you know, a lot of services, their rebuffering is down into the single percentage points or even less than a single percentage points, but that still matters, right? That still means you have thousands, tens of thousands, and maybe hundreds of thousands of customers, depending on how many subscribers you have, who have a really bad experience watching the show, and it's frustrating, right? So that's the kind of thing you don't go back to. But that's a difficult one to solve because it's, you know, the complexity is in the devices, it's in the network, it's in the app itself. We see a lot of folks who are using Bitmovin products. We still see them investing into kind of the core building blocks of their video streaming application. So, for example, the video player itself, where they could be spending that really valuable capital dollars into improving the app experience, right? How the user is navigating the app. And that's kind of our big value proposition is don't reinvent the wheel, right? There's video players out there, they're proven, they work, there's encoders and all of that. You don't need to build your own. But a lot of technologists still like to kind of own all of the building blocks themselves.
I also think, you know, kind of going back to the cyclical conversation about, you know, the subscription side of streaming, the UI and UX is another piece of this puzzle. I mean, part of the reason streaming came about was because the cable interface, while it was pretty uniform, it was not user friendly. It was a nightmare. And then you had folks like Roku come out and look at how simple it all was, easy to navigate, it's easy to find things relatively compared to, you know, the old set-top boxes. You know, it was really, really simple and solved the customer problem. I think what we're seeing is customers are so sophisticated now, they expect more. And you know, we can't be serving them like it's 10 years ago and streaming. We've got to evolve.
Yeah. Well, and what's happened specifically in the last 3 years because of lockdown is people bought substantially more connected television screens than they thought they were going to, putting them in rooms that they thought they would never use for that. And so they now have an even greater demand because they've replaced what was a very easy to navigate device, the phone in the home, with what is a much more difficult to navigate, but a better experience from a viewing standpoint. And that transition for especially the younger consumer, you know, we should be providing them an experience that looks a lot like what they're used to on their phone, only way better. And we can't give them that kind of navigability. And that's frustrating the younger consumer, especially as they get there. They're like, what do you mean this doesn't work this way? That's how TikTok works. I could just make it go like this. So, you know, I think we need to kind of bring a lot of the convenience of our smartphone to the big television, and still the interface is just so frictionful.
Yeah. I'm glad you bring up TikTok, Evan, because I think that's a crucial point. You know, the reason, part of the reason it controls, you know, so much time spent, I think, is obviously the ease of use, the recommendation algorithm. It's just an endless stream of content that it believes you will find interesting, and usually those users do. That was also a key factor in Netflix's rise to streaming dominance. Its famous recommendation algorithm that could serve you more content that you're interested in. Let's dig into that a little bit. Are there other ways that streamers can use user data, AI, this kind of algorithm technology to offer a better experience for users?
I can start with that.
Go for it.
I can just speak from the Star's perspective, at least. We definitely, obviously pay a lot of attention to the data around customer viewing habits, engagement, not just to drive content investment, but the great thing about the digital space is you can be and should be very nimble. So, like I said, we build these strategies where we acquire, program, and produce content to serve these audiences that are kind of around our marquee programming. And if something's popping, maybe we didn't expect it to pop, or maybe, it was a little bit, further down the list of recommendations. If something starts popping organically, we can turn on a dime and make sure that it gets in front of more folks and that more people see value from that. And the great thing about, the aggregation partnerships that we're in is that we also work with them for the same reason, right? Because we all have the same goal in terms of keeping the customer happy and retaining them. So we use that a lot in our recommendations and our marketing to make sure that customers are seeing the value of something that we're seeing kind of happen organically in the back end.
Yeah, there's a challenge, I think, that, not all the data you get from a consumer comes with demographic data. And so there is a bit of a challenge with regards to, and then you're dealing with, through third parties. So if you're selling data, if you're selling a channel through Amazon channels, that's a different experience sometimes than the data you're going to get from your own native app as well. So there's a range of data that you get, and it's not always kind of equal. But I think I go back to something I brought up at the very beginning, which is, I think that a lot of services should be using their data to look into the other ways they can serve their consumers that will keep them more loyal long term, that will lengthen the lifetime value, or increase the lifetime value of every consumer. And the two different things I can point to is the Hulu Spotify partnership, which has been arguably one of the most successful marketing partnerships in streaming, and then the recent Paramount Walmart partnership, which I think gives those two brands a competitive advantage in certain markets that they need. And that's going to, help serve some sort of utility. And the data is there for you because I think to a certain extent, it's much easier to use the data that a lot of the services have to match up with other partnerships that might make sense. And I am curious as to why there aren't more of those types of partnerships out there to create bundles for consumers to serve their needs.
I think the cost is challenging. I'll just speak as a service. Somebody's got to bear the cost of those incredible. Part of the thing you called out to, one was almost free and one is free, right? So, Paramount Plus obviously having an ad-supported tier helps them monetize that, but doesn't mean that it's still not coming at a pretty big cost. So you got to be willing to eat some money in the short term for the hope of a long-term sticky customer. And I think that's worked for some people, but I'm not sure everybody's convinced. And also depends on your overall business, right? Some Apple TV is another great example. They're selling phones.
They're not selling.
They happen to,
the TV service.
The TV piece of it is great. Right, but they're making.
Well, that's
money
the thing
on
is
the
that's what you're up against. You're up against somebody who can afford to lose tens of billions of dollars in television on NFL Sunday Ticket.
Yeah.
Because they're selling phones, because they're selling a much larger bundle. It's a hard business.
Well, I think that's another.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to the understanding who your customer base is and the total addressable market and how you're making money and being profitable rather than trying to play somebody else's game, essentially.
And I think that's another point towards consolidation, right? One of the benefits of a consolidated but a very distributed and large business is that you can offer a lot of value and you can trade off one part of your business for another part of your business, right? Disney ran a promotion for Black Friday for Hulu and ESPN and Disney, right, targeted to acquire more subscribers, and they did. They did a great job of it because they almost gave Hulu away for free. So that's the benefit of a big distributed and consolidated business, but not everyone can be there. But I do think that we'll see more large media companies acquire smaller businesses and find ways to kind of offer value to their subscribers that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We're closing in on time here. I do want to touch on quickly because we've discussed advertising a little bit and how much more important it's becoming to the streaming landscape. Almost all of the major streamers have introduced ad-supported tiers now. I'm curious, especially Stephanie, Starz is an exclusively ad-free service. How can those types of services continue to thrive? I'm not saying they can't, but I'm curious how, what sort of strategies can be taken for ad-free services to keep thriving in these conditions.
Yeah, it's been interesting since I started at Starz and we launched our OTT product, which was around the same time 7 years ago. We've turned into basically the only premium left, the only true premium left. Never thought that would have happened, but I think that again, sort of parroting what I was saying before, we've had a really clear customer value proposition from the beginning, and at the end of the day, most ad-supported tiers still cost money. So we're it's not that. I mean, maybe, I think fast channels are a different animal altogether. Many ad-supported tiers, most ad-supported tiers are still costing money. We have a really clear value proposition for our customer base. We have a really clear content strategy, and people know what they're signing up for. I think you have an ad-supported tier when you're serving such a broad group of people like a Paramount Plus that you have to lower the bar a little bit for them, make it a little easier for them to be a subscriber. But we just haven't felt the need to do that, and we've had a really strong customer growth story without an ad-supported tier. So
yeah.
I mean, given the choice, I would prefer never to watch an ad. The only ads I suffer through are ones that are in live television that I watch. And so, there is a consumer that prefers that experience and will hyperpay for it on an ongoing basis. It's a matter of figuring out what the economics around that consumer base for you is. In Stephanie's case, to go back to the addressable market, how many people are willing to pay a premium for this ad-free product? And I think there's going to be a decent number of humans who continue to behave that way. They're going to be probably higher end consumers as well. So therefore, even more valuable long term. So I think everybody in the ecosystem seems to be struggling with what the next model is. To Igor's point from earlier, these huge, massive Death Stars like Apple and Amazon, they're going to do it all. The question is, what do the people who do one section of the media economy? What's your model? Figure it out in the new economies, but chasing other people's models is probably, I think this is the point Stephanie just made very emphatically. Chasing other people's models because they seem smart probably isn't smart. Building one that makes sense for the addressable market you have at a profitable margin, that is smart. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be threading a needle.
Yeah.
I think you're also, there was even an article today about, a huge quantity of Disney Plus customers expressed, that they would be interested in kind of downgrading to the ad-supported service to save money. But that's a trade-off. So you're trading off revenue for, you hope, enough ad.
Well, but if you look at their price, theoretically,
revenue.
yes. But if you look at the pricing structure they built for themselves, it's actually an interesting trade. There's not that much of a trade that goes. The new ad-free tier is so expensive. They clearly wanted to drive people into this tier but it's not that much of a difference between what
Yeah.
the current bundle with ad-free Disney Plus is. So I think there's a play there. I think someone did the analysis. We'll see. I think their bundled ad product will wind up being cable at a lesser margin, but at a better margin than a lot of others out there.
Yeah, I just think as folks are pulling back on their marketing budgets and their advertising budgets, it's an interesting time for services to be launching ad-supported tiers to sort of fill those revenue gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. The streaming landscape continues to be quite the roller coaster. Well, that is our time, everyone. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us. Thank you so much, and hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.